Hello, gamers. It's Tim here again. And today I'm going to talk to you about a personal topic, which I do sometimes, but I'm going to go into a little more detail than I usually do, and that's anxiety. Um, if you want to talk about game stuff, we could talk about game stuff in another video, and I'll happily do that. But for this video, I want to talk about anxiety because I have not had anxiety my entire life. Even though I've had a little bit of depression that I know existed all the way back to 8 years old, it was magnified by a later traumatic event, and so I ended up with this much longer diagnosis than just depression. But I also developed anxiety, and before that, like anybody else, I had when I met a new person, when I got involved in a new group or interacted with a new situation, I also had butterflies in my stomach. The idea, that little nervousness. But I could shake it off and go do the thing. Um, I still can to some degree for certain things, but there are other things I can't do. And here's the issue with triggers. Triggers vary per person. Um, Notably, for example, people with post-traumatic stress disorder often have noise as one of theirs, specifically loud sounds or sounds that sound like combat if they were in combat or had some other traumatic event that happened. It's usually tied to the event. For me, it's not exactly tied to the event, but it is fallout from the event. Um, and that's the thing. When I say I'm talking about triggers and I'm doing so seriously, I'm not saying, oh no, you're triggered. That's just stupid. Yeah, I mean, if you go take a class and your class is about something specific, um, like, for example, I took a class on feminist poetry and feminist writing and feminist this other thing. And I had a bit of a harder time um, empathizing with some of the authors when they wrote about their pain because they were the other woman in a cheating relationship on their husband. And it's hard to feel empathy with someone who basically is helping somebody else cheat in a relationship when you've suffered having people cheat on you. Um, so for me, it's like, you know, I understand she hurts. I get that. But if you're the other woman or the other man in a relationship, um, it's a lot harder for me to feel empathy for you. It may hurt you terribly. It may hurt you a lot. And I do have some knowledge of that to draw from. Um, so, I'm not saying that she didn't deserve to be able to put these into words and write a poem about them and, get her pain on the page. In fact, I've done that myself many times for different reasons, but not that reason. But it was just hard. And I could see where somebody, because some of these feminist women in the authors, not the people in the class, because there were men and women mixed in most of them. Although one of them was like me and another guy, and then it was all women. And it struck me as funny as that he brought up, the teacher brought up a very unfeminist viewpoint from a famous, popular, considerably attractive actor, and the women brushed it off as, oh no, no, no. We still like it. But if somebody said that today, I mean, this has been decades ago. If somebody said that today, there'd probably be a lot more women, young women, who would be like, oh, but he's so misogynistic. And that was my feeling even back then, 20 years ago, a little more than that actually. But I tend to be somebody who notices things. But when we get to triggers, when we brought down to triggers, and that may like for some of these poets, um, if they're talking about like look, if you're reading a book and it gives their poems and it talks about their life story and it talks about abuse they suffered and somebody walks into the class not knowing that it's going to talk about abuse, that can be a triggering moment. Now, they may not realize that's going to come up in a feminist class with feminist poets, or whatever they're studying. They may not realize that some sort of trigger is actually going to exist. So when people were talking about this girl who claimed she was triggered over a class, it became a big joke, and triggers became a big joke. Now, for me, triggers are an important thing, and they are a big thing to know. And each person's is different. She might really have been triggered. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know her. I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt in this situation because I don't know the full story and I haven't gone and researched it. Because at first, to me, that seems like a silly reason to walk out of class. But now, if I were in a similar class and read similar things um, to what caused my trauma, I would feel triggered and want to walk out. I don't know that I would turn around and drop the class. I would probably leave immediately, go have a small breakdown, and panic a little bit, have anxiety attack. But I'd probably recover and still come back to class eventually. I'd probably talk with the professor about it and say, hey, just give me a warning, let me know, that's all. Because I'm not going to turn away knowledge if I can help it. Now, I didn't have this person like that in any of my classes, but triggers are unique to every individual, and how severe they are unique to every individual, just like the responses are unique to every individual. So, for example, I can't go to certain stores and shop because just the very shape, existence, the building, so much stuff that is wrapped into the walls has triggering effects on me. Part of it is noise, but that's not all of it. Part of it's contact with people. It's social because my anxiety is mostly social now, which means, despite being a former great customer service agent, I probably couldn't deal with that kind of job now. If it were helping somebody, in a very long-term way, I could probably do it, but I could not do the normal stressful salesman type customer service job. And that's a shame because I enjoyed that at one point in time. Unlike a lot of people, and I had bad stories. Believe me, I had bad stories. But anxiety is a powerful thing, and it's really hard to pin down. And knowing triggers, knowing your triggers, knowing other people's triggers can be a helpful thing. Because if you have a friend and you read something about a movie or seen something about a movie that you think might trigger them because you know about the event or have seen them have triggered events before, I don't think we should go see this movie. Let's go watch something else because I think it will be triggering for you. If they still insist, go, but be prepared to walk out of the movie with them because they may need you. I know that when I was married and I had my wife, it was easier to go places when I had her. It's easier to go places with my better friends. It's not easy to say go with my nephew. I love my nephew to death. Both of them. I have two, but I love them both to death. And while I could probably go with the older one because he's kind of laconic about most things, the other one runs his mouth a million miles a minute. I was bad as a kid doing the same thing, but he doesn't even seem to take a breath between sentences or between commas or at all. It just runs on and runs on and runs on and runs on. And he's a brilliant young man. He's in his 20s. He's brilliant. Has a very astute mind, but he didn't get a diploma. He doesn't have a GED. And that has to do with a lot of issues around his life. Um, but politically, he would be this brilliant mind. But I can't go anywhere with him because he doesn't know when to shut up. And, I love the kid and I like talking to him when we're on the subject I care about, that both of us care about. And he's willing to listen, like, just stop, let somebody else talk. Okay, now you can go. We're finished. But he needs literally hand signs. Stop, go. And for me, that just adds to my anxiety because it's constant run on dialogue. That noise just, it turns into static that hurts in your head. And some big box stores are like that to me. Um, Sometimes I can go in, but I used to go in at odd hours, and even then, I would get some anxiety and leave as I would go in, get what I needed, and run out as quickly as possible. Um, and then I found some smaller local grocery chain. I mean, it's not a small chain, but it's one of the lower cost ones in our area. But they have carpeted uh, their grocery store, and the carpet cuts down the noise, and they're not as big in general as the big box stores. In fact, one of their stores is tiny here, and I'm far more comfortable going to that store even when it's busy and there's lots of people, which are one of my triggers is lots of people. And I don't know what about the people caused that, but it's literally a combination of like static in my head and feeling like all my nerves are being scraped raw. Like all of them are bared to salt and somebody has poured salt on my nerve ending, and just, on a wound. Um, and it just, it hurts and I can't explain it better than that. And for some people, they get mad, they go crazy, they hit things. Some people are like me, they want to go and curl up in a ball, go hide, just break down into tears. That's the really bad reactions that I have. I can't even stand up. In fact, when my wife left me, and she probably will never see this video, but when my wife left me, when I found out she was leaving me, I tightened my hands into fists. But I have years and years of Taekwondo experience. I'm not going to make a fist before I hit somebody. It's just not going to happen. I'm trained not to. The fist comes as you're coming to hit from my training. When I'm doing this, I am digging my fingernails into my hand, and you may not be able to see it, but the marks, what I'm doing is causing myself pain. And I don't like pain, but I cause myself pain because it's the only one of the few things that keep me from breaking down and crying and falling to the floor when I have an anxiety attack. And talking about anxiety is pushing pretty close to having an anxiety attack. Talking about my ex-wife is one of them because she just didn't understand what one of my triggers was. And she stepped on it like it was a landmine and kept stepping on it like it was another landmine. And she didn't know. She didn't listen at some point in our conversation. So she triggered me, and I broke down, and it was a kind of trigger that wasn't just an anxious trigger. It was a full-on anxiety attack slash depressive mode attack because anxiety triggers depression, and I bottom out, and then I become suicidal. Most of the time, I don't have the strength or motivation to try and commit suicide. You have to be healthier, than that kind of bottoming out in order to commit suicide because you have to be able to make a plan. You have to be able to go through with the plan. And usually, if you're as depressed as there's one reason they warn you about antidepressants, may increase, suicidal thoughts or suicidal attempts. It's because when you're literally that exhausted from the anxiety and the depression, or just the depression, you can't form the cohesive plans necessary to move forward. But when you start in on the medications, and some of them do aggravate those thoughts, but other ones just stop keeping the part of you that is incoherent, that isn't making any sense, and isn't fitting together, start fitting together. And when you start getting those thoughts that fit together and you're depressed still, you start thinking of a plan. And anxiety, that's one anxiety reaction I have. Besides the anxiety attack and the want to curl up in a ball and the want to cry, is before I understood the triggers and understood ways to deal with the triggers and not the pain thing, but real ways to deal with the triggers, such as looking at something and paying so much attention to it, like a ceiling that has those tiles in it and has all the little holes. Start counting those holes, or start counting the minutes on a clock, or start naming plants that I know the names of, or books that I know the name of by their covers. Which you'd surprise. Some of them have changed covers over the years, but you'd be surprised that I can still identify some by cover, at least by their old covers. But by focusing on that, I can help calm myself down from a triggered event. And then when we go to that point, we talk about events, and everybody has different events. As I said, some people become violent, some people become weepy, some people literally become exhausted and just want to sleep. And that's there's an entire spectrum of possible reactions, even violence, as I said before. Um, and if you don't know, if you don't know somebody has PTSD or other potential illnesses that are triggering, or if you do know, you need to help them. If there's somebody you care about and want to help out. I remember reading about that sniper's death. Sniper that was painted as an American hero, but really probably won't find this popular. He was really somebody who did not have the emotional ability to connect with people he killed. So he he found a job that let him kill people, and he was happy for that. That's not necessarily a good mental health to be in the first place. But him and a friend decided to take a third friend who was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder to a shooting range, and that friend pulled their guns and shot them to death. Now, that is a sorrowful way to die, but it was also them being very insensitive of what PTSD was. They were trying, despite the fact that this man apparently had empathy problems with some enemies, whoever he was pointed at, pretty much. This man had, or his friend had, enough empathy for this PTSD soldier that they had dealt with and understood, or thought they understood. But they didn't learn enough about his triggers, and so he literally reacted, and he violently reacted, and he killed them. And that's a sorrowful thing. Even though I don't necessarily approve of that man's career or his life choices in that, he's considered kind of a hero here in my hometown. I think because his wife uh, lives here. I don't know, but um, that man had problems himself, and they needed to be dealt with in a healthy manner. Which being a soldier is not necessarily a healthy cover for those issues. But he definitely made a mistake when he tried to take a PTSD person to a shooting range, especially somebody who was a veteran, because their trauma is often gunfire, explosions, you know. So taking him to a shooting range is probably the least wise thing they could have done. They were trying to help, which speaks to the man's best part of his humanity, is at least he was trying to help. But he didn't have enough understanding of the problem. So I can at least give him that much credit, is that he was trying to help a friend or help a fellow vet. So it's not all bad, it's not all good. No people are. I was reading a book, and the reason I'm reading this book it's a superhero book, but it has some little good philosophy points. And one of the characters is Russian, and he quoted a dissident Russian philosopher, and I can't remember the name, but he said, "If only we could separate the good people from the bad people, it would be easy to just lock the bad people up and keep the good people safe. But the problem is, good and evil are a line in the hearts of every man. It's just which we feed, kind of thing." And that's true. We all have evil in us. We all have good in us. And one of the reasons that I have the faith I have is trying to feed the good. And one of the reasons I'm trying to do this video about triggers and about anxiety is trying to spread some of the things I've learned to help other people. If you have a friend who has triggers, they may not be able to tell you they have triggers. But if you see them start having these negative reactions to things that you would just shrug off, it might be important to ask them how they're feeling. And they may not answer you. They might not be able to enunciate in words what is going on in their head or emotionally. I know for a long time I couldn't. But, and the things are with anxiety can take things away from you. It took my ability to go anywhere I wanted away. Because I used to. I used to just get in my car and go somewhere. Sometimes it was a comic book store, sometimes it was a bookstore, but I would just go. And now I can't just do that. I can't. I mean, the local bookstore is another town over, and we had a small Texas-based chain that was here, but they went out of business too because they can't compete with Amazon. Um, and that's the saying is, so we only have one physical non-used bookstore that I know of. So I'm more likely to go to the used bookstore because it's small and it's comfortable and there's usually not a lot of people. Um, but they're used books, and I tend to keep my books in very good condition. Tend, not always. Sometimes they get handed around and used, or I get them used and they're not in the condition I would like them to be. But it's one of the things is it took that away, but it also took music away. For the longest time, I couldn't listen to music, and I couldn't watch movies that used music or TV shows that used music significantly, which most movies do. You may not recognize it until it's not there. Um, and I didn't have music for a long time, and it took. I think it's audiophile. A person who loves music. I had a friend who loves music. He introduced me to a band. He knew, like, when I was younger, in my 20s, I listened to heavy metal. And that kind of surprised all of my friends that I was listening to heavy metal. And they're like, "You like heavy metal?" Well, yeah, apparently I've always liked heavy metal. I just didn't recognize it as such because I never pursued a band or pursued, it's just like at one point I didn't care about an author. Like I would just read whatever I found interesting on the shelf. And then I started realizing that there are certain things, certain authors do that I enjoy, and started following the author, not just whatever random book caught my eye. But we're talking, I was much, much younger in those two different. And I started following bands that I'd heard a song from and enjoyed. And and I didn't have music once that was taken away. And this audiophile friend said, "Well, my son found these videos. Think you'll find them amusing, and I think you'll like the music." And it's a hard rock band, Lordy of all things, that brought me music back. Partly because in many ways it's like watching a cross between the carnival, uh, an old school kind of carnival freak show mixed with Halloween. It delights the inner child in me in some ways. And in other ways, they make their music videos. Some of them are like just brilliant, almost scary stories. Not like really scary, but like, we know this isn't really scary, but we want to play up that it's scary. And some of that just it told a little bit of a story with their song, and it was interesting to me. It brought me back to music. And over time, that brought me to other bands and other groups that I could listen to. And I can still go back and listen to some of the old music I used to, but not all of it. And then the next major person I started following was Lindsey Sterling. So, you have this musician who dances and these crazy musicians who dress up like monsters. And they're very much, in many ways, kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum in things. Although, in a way, she does try and tell sort of a story with her music. And I like her earlier stuff without vocals somewhat better than some of the stuff that has a singer with her violin playing. I guess her singing is not considered, good enough herself. Maybe she doesn't have a good voice for it. I don't have a voice for it. But I still like music with lyrics to some degree. But I like her music without lyrics. But there used to be a point in life in which I had a car that only had an AM radio, and I found a AM radio station that played classical music. So that's what I listened to because I didn't like driving without music. And nowadays, I have, CDs to listen to in my car. Yes, I still have CDs. I still have a CD player. Um, and I did at one point have a subscription to one of the satellite music services, but they took off like because they had two or three channels I listened to, and one of them repeated itself so regularly I was like, okay, this is tiresome. And then another one was really good, but they took this channel called Road Trip Music to where you could only stream it from a computer or a cell phone. You couldn't just get it directly from the satellite to your car, to the device made to beam it. I'm like, it's for road trips. Why can't I listen to it in my car? You people are insane. But they made it streaming only, and I was like, whatever. It's not worth paying for the service now, so shut it down. And so, I have a CD player in my car, so I just bought CDs of Lindsey Sterling, and that's pretty much all I have anymore is Lindsey Sterling to listen to. But even then, there are times I don't listen to it. I just turn it off and listen to road vibration and the sounds around me and stuff because I just don't do music like I used to. Not in the quantity or, level of purchasing. Like I might get one CD every 3 or 4 years. Uh, this year it's a band that did covers, but they did hard rock covers of some old '80s songs I liked and other things. Um, and I enjoyed that. And they put out their own little. I didn't get the CD. I got the download of those songs. Uh, so to listen to, but it took music away. And this audiophile friend helped me find music again, and that was important. because that helped me a lot getting that back. And there are books I can't read. There's a reason I want trigger warnings on books. There's a reason I want trigger warnings about movies. Um, because I can't, there are some movies that I will walk out of because they touched a trigger. And there are sometimes I don't even know there's a trigger and they run into it. Um, for example, there's a movie that was called The Road, and this doesn't tie into my other triggers, but I watched the first little bits of it, and it's a post-apocalyptic movie and it's a dark one, and I was watching it, and they get to this point where they're showing people being kept to be eaten, and that reminded me so much of the videos I watched on the Holocaust and how people looked in the Holocaust that I was like, I'm done with this movie, and walked away. Now, fortunately, it was on a video device, so I didn't have to walk out of a theater or anything. But it was just, it's not a trigger that I realized I had, but seeing people in those kinds of conditions just affect me. That was more one that triggered me to be sorrowful for the bad things that happens to other people because I have a great deal of empathy. And that's one of the reasons that I think talking about triggers is important. Talking about anxiety is important. But anxiety affects everybody different. Some people get violent. Some people break down. Some people run away. Some people, they have breathing troubles. Um, they have what used to be called panic attacks, but are now anxiety attacks. And somehow that's differentiated now, and I'm not quite sure what the line is. Um, but I have to have people either with me or a dog with me that can, be taken places. And my state doesn't recognize emotional support dogs, which to a degree, I agree with their stance. A dog that is needed for support reasons needs to be trained on how to deal as a support dog. It doesn't mean it has to be one that goes to fetch and turn off the lights and go with you and that kind of stuff. But it needs to be one that can go with you and can recognize the signs, like when I was starting to have an anxiety attack, to put itself bodily between me and someone else and, help escort me somewhere else, some place where my anxiety is not being triggered. And I had a dog um, who would have made a great one if she'd been trained. She hadn't been trained, but she did those things naturally. But I can only take her to like PetSmart. And the dog I have now, she's not good at stores. She's very nervous around other people. In fact, I didn't even think she would be my dog for the longest time. But so when you talk about triggers, when you talk about anxiety, it's important to understand that every person is different and every person's degree of those things is different that has it. And not everybody does. So, somebody getting upset over something, yes, it's okay to go, okay, that's a little severe, it's laugh worthy. And then there are cases when it's not. Like I took a whole bunch of feminist poetry, feminist writing classes because they were offered by my school, and it interested me as a viewpoint that I was not normally exposed to. So I took them. And I sometimes followed a teacher around, and sometimes I followed the classes around. At one point, I know my professor who advised me said that I probably should work towards a women's studies as a secondary, but I was already had enough hours in my minor for speech communication. So this tells you, I was taking speech communication courses that included public speaking. So I could stand up on a stage at one point and talk to people. Doesn't mean I won't go, eh, and be a little nervous, but I could do that. And the communication courses were a boon for me, helping to, when dealing with like my counselor and learning how to state what I needed to state and, you know, dealing with things. I probably talked about it before, but I thought this chest pain that I had right here was psychosomatic because it usually only happened when I was having a depressive episode. Well, it turns out that I have inflammation here. And when I have a depressive episode, I tend to tighten my body up. So, of course, it causes that point in my sternum where the muscles connect or whatever, the ligaments, I don't know, whatever's there to hurt. So it's got a physical cause, but a psychological trigger, which is weird. But now that I know it's physical, I can take a medication for it and can deal with it a little better than I was. Now, there is still some psychological effect that isn't causing this chest pain in the sternum. It feels like my heart hurts, like where people tell you your heart is when it's really here. But there is some psychosomatic element to it, just a tiny bit. But there's a physical element to it too, so I can treat the physical part. And anxiety is, I will tell you, the worst. One of the worst things to deal with. Depression is terrible. It's it's a mess. It can lead to way too many deaths if it's not treated and not respected in other people. And so I do. This is one reason I talk about depression, and one reason I'm talking about anxiety now is to say, hey, look, I'm pretty much a regular guy. I play role-playing games. I play video games. I write stories. Um, I used to chase after women. I'm 48 now. It's not as easy to chase women. Not that I literally chased women the way some people did. I wasn't one of these people who went woman after woman after woman after woman. I found one that interested me, and I talked to her and excluded the others. And if we connected, and things happened. Um, and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it failed. It fizzled, or um, it just didn't get there for either of us. So, but I've always been pretty monogamous. Monogamous, monogamous. When I was in an actual relationship, I didn't chase women after that, but because I wasn't interested. And that's some things that I have had to explain. Like I had to explain to my ex-wife that while she did not fit the ideal body type I fell for, like physically, I loved her, and she never understood that. It's like having a preference between two ice creams, but finding a brand of ice cream that you absolutely love that one flavor when you normally like say you like both chocolate and vanilla, and you find this one brand that's vanilla, and you prefer chocolate a little bit, just a little bit, and then you find this perfect vanilla brand that just it makes vanilla perfect, and that's what my relationship with her was like until some bad stuff happened. And I couldn't control it because of my anxiety, and it caused depression. And she hit one of my triggers, basically like jumping up and down on a landmine to make sure it went off. She didn't realize she was. It wasn't a conscious effort, but she hit it. And when I tried to head it off at the pass and talk to her about it, I didn't have the best words to tell her. And so that led to our divorce. Um, and I can't put blame on her for that other than the fact that instead of trying to talk it out and work it out, she just walked away. But depression is hard on more than just the depressed person. It can be hard on all the people around them. I'm pretty sure that I have a friend who's going through some depressive issues now, and everybody, around him seems to want to brush it off. And I'm thinking, don't brush it off, start talking about this stuff. But he's not willing to do it with a professional. He says, I don't have money, which is true, but locally there are programs to help people who don't have money that I was on for many years to help them to deal with these problems so we don't have more bodies out there, more people die. And it's minimal. I mean, my state is one of the worst for mental health support. Not the worst, but one of the worst. And so it is taking me a lot of years to be able to talk about anxiety and depression and all this stuff in a face-to-face manner, at least as close as I can get on the internet. But, um, you know, you got to realize that when somebody says there's a trigger here or I want trigger warnings, they're not usually just joking. They're not usually, and like I've had people tell me, um, okay, this might have a triggering thing. Don't read it or don't watch it. And I know there's a recent book I asked for spoilers on, and I know that if I had read that, I would have had a triggered moment. And I'd already been moving away from that author anyway because his character had become such a, I don't know, just like keep powering up this character into the infinity, until they're infinitely powerful. And I'm like, one of my favorite theories of all time never actually powers up their character at all. Not really. I mean, I think at the end she gets one little bonus gift for doing all the work she's done, and it's simply the ability to have children because being what she was in the book, she couldn't have children. In fact, it was pretty common for what she was, and that's the Vaughn Kitty Norville novel, which like throughout 90% of the series, she just talks. She's just this person who talks about stuff. And, that's all she does. She asks questions. She talks to people. At no time does she get like imbued with extra supernatural powers. I think the most important thing here is the first book, she's pretty much victimized. But being a supernatural character and being victimized because she's a werewolf in that book, a werewolf named Kitty, yes. Even though she suffered from basically a situation that victimized her, she grows emotionally. That's about the biggest gift she gets. She doesn't get any supernatural juju. It's all in her talking and making friends and meeting people and learning ways that are not like where she had learned things needed to be. She learned that that wasn't a healthy situation, and she eventually gets out of it. And she admits on air she's a werewolf because she's a radio talk show host. And that's the first book, and I suggest reading that series because it's very, very good up until about the last book. And the last book feels very rushed because they've been building up a villain for 5 books at that point, and it's like 17 long or something. It's just this huge number of books. And they've been building him up, and then it just kind of withers. But the main thing I read it for was for exploration of urban fantasy themes and the more or less fact that she was not that powerful. She turns into a wolf. She doesn't turn into an 8-foot tall, 300-pound rampaging monster. She turns into a wolf that weighs the same amount she does, pretty much, maybe a little more. I don't know. They never actually described whether the mass to shape thing mattered. I do have a book like that. It's Operation Chaos by Powell Anderson, which I love because they literally are. Their weight stays the same. So he becomes a pretty good sized wolf, not huge, but in order for a were-tiger to exist, a proper were-tiger, the man he runs into is like this 500-pound guy who can't hardly walk because in order to be a big tiger, he has to have that personal mass himself. So it's an interesting because he takes a very scientific kind of line of thought with his fantasy in that, and I really enjoyed that. But that's from like the 50s. And it was before there was an urban fantasy genre. And it's not. It's an alternate reality fantasy genre where they have a very different World War II. They probably had a very different World War One. And magic is their technology. It literally replaces. They don't have cell phones. This is before cell phones, but they didn't have phones. They used crystal balls to call each other. They didn't have cars. They had brooms and rugs that flew. And it's a great little collection of novellas and short stories that tell one complete story. And then he wrote a novel about that setting with the same characters, um, them trying to go to the moon with magic. And it was a nice little book. It wasn't as good as the little short ones, but whatever. But the Kitty Norval ones are nice because she doesn't actually power up. The character does not suddenly get, okay, you're this supernatural super wolf. She's not. She's just a wolf who talks things out and talks people to where they try and kill her, and she gets friends to help who are fairly powerful, but that's it. She herself is never powered up through the entire series. I think the most powering up she gets is reclaiming herself from being a victim in the first and second book and taking a stand. Never, uh, but it's a great series up until the very end. And the very end amuses me greatly because there's something she says in the books and says repeatedly, and it amuses the heck out of me because what she finds out in that last book, but it just felt rushed. But again, that's one reason I won't read this other person's series is because he just keeps ladling superpowers onto his character. And sometimes that's not interesting. It's not. I mean, I'm a comic book reader. Yes, I still actually read comic books, even floppies. I still buy them from time to time, not as often as I used to. I usually get trades or because I just can't afford the expense of a bunch of comic books. I mean, I'm literally have to budget my money within a hair's breadth for survival. I mean, the fact that like that stack of game stuff came out of a shelf, and it's most of it's older, except I think maybe my D&D 5th edition books are back there. But I had to budget for that, and it's literally it's not fun to be in a situation where you have anxiety, can't control it. I mean, I'm on medication for it. And it does make things vastly better. I can now go places I couldn't go before. I can now do things I couldn't do before. I've got the music back to a limited degree. Most triggers are not going to make me break down and cry. They may make me stop reading a book. I know that there's an author I loved his stories, but one of his stories I can't read at all. And it's not even from my triggering traumatic event. It's just from the course of history of my life. And that's the main character has a wife in the first book. The second book jumps around in time, and then either the third or maybe the second. I don't remember which one. But his wife just leaves him. Not much of an explanation either, just leaves him. And I'm like, yeah, I can't read that one. I can read his other book. And now I don't think I'll read him again because the last book she shows back up. And turns out the character has a son. And that makes her, in my mind, somebody worth being stabbed in the face. Not really, but as a fictional character, finding out years after the fact that your wife gave birth to your son and left you without giving you the option or choice. Now, it's a complicated thing in that book because, let me be honest, is she tells him it can be seen as manipulative, her manipulating. But she does it, and that's also manipulative. So she really has no good choice to make. But at the same time, that's something that person kind of needed to know because she took the choice away from him completely. He didn't understand why she was asking for him to walk away from what he was. And he deserved to have that information. While, yes, it might seem manipulative, at least he's able to make the decision from a informed point of view. So, yeah, no more of that offer for me, but for different triggering reasons. And that's more, I'm just not going to read him. I'm probably not going to reread his books either, and I used to reread them pretty regularly. But sometimes you can do stuff to fictional characters that just hits too close to my life or my personal fears. And that's one of my personal fears. Is that some woman that I have loved who broke up with me someday shows up with a kid, or a kid shows up at my door, and says, hi, yeah, I'm 20 years old and I'm your daughter. What? You know? That kind of terrifies me, because have that time taken away from you is just horrifying to me. Then again, if I'm 48 years old, I still want kids. It's not going to happen, because where I live and the dating situation here, I'm not willing to sink to the levels a lot of people my age are. Because there are people my age who have enough money that they can lure little 20-something-year-olds into a relationship, because they can provide for that person. And I can't. But the fact that they're using one to manipulate the other, it's either that or women who've been who are divorced and are probably bitter. I'm not bitter. Really, I'm not. I don't blame all women. I don't blame all relationships. It's one of those things like, it happens. But I've run into some very bitter women, trying to date. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to walk away. You deal with your stuff, I'll deal with mine. But, anxiety makes everything worse. Everything. Because, especially if you try dating. And I did date my wife and woo my wife, so to speak, with anxiety, but I was doing better. And then it crashed and burned after we split up. But it got better again. And I'm always going to keep fighting. That's the thing for me, is I don't give up without clawing tooth and nail to stay alive, because I've got stuff to do. I've got stories to tell. I've got people to tell about anxiety and about just how rough it can be. And I tell you, it's hell. It is, for me, probably the best, real, closest thing I can imagine to actually hell, is somebody having anxiety like I have, and feeling like I felt when I dealt with the world and had it when I couldn't leave my house. Not because of COVID, but because of an illness I had and couldn't control. And we tried who knows how many medications, but it wasn't as many as the antidepressants and the mood stabilizers and the sleep medicine. And, at least we found an anxiety drug that worked pretty well, and it stayed with me pretty well. Plus, I've also, the counselor I had did a really good job of, this last one, just kicking my butt into making sure I knew how to deal with stuff. And that's one of the things, like, focus on something else other than the moment, count holes in the wall, count plants you can name the plant, just try and redirect your attention away from the emotional experience you're having to something very simple, something you can do. And that works for me. It might not work for everybody, but it is one that does for me. So that's my thing on anxiety. It's really tough. It's really hard. And nobody should suffer it if we could help. And nobody should be mocked for having it, or actually being triggered by something when it's a legitimate trigger and not just somebody using it as an excuse. Because the truth is, real triggers hurt. They cause somebody pain, of some kind, immense pain, something their body can't it can't react to right. So it starts messing with the chemicals in the brain because it has no physical cause. It's all emotional and in their head. And by in their head, I'm not talking about imaginary. Imaginary is very different. Being in my head is chemicals, a brain, neurons, and they're not working right. So I take medications for them to help improve them. You know, it's like the little joke going that went around on Facebook is if your neurotransmitters don't work, store bought is fine. Of course, really, most of the meds that I've been on help keep mine working right, which is keeping my body from reabsorbing the serotonin or the like. I don't remember the exact description of how it works. But this video is almost an hour. If you've bared with me all this long through all this crazy stuff, understand if you have anxiety, I feel for you. I empathize with you. And I want you to know there's help out there. Go look for it. You know, you may have to call a depression hotline or you may have to connect with someplace online, even if it's just forums. In fact, I didn't know I would need some of the things I needed over the years, like disability. I didn't expect I'd need disability. I thought it would just go away like all my other depressive stuff. And it hasn't. It's taken years of medication, that I'm still on and will be on for the rest of my life unless one of them stops working to be functional, to be able to do videos, to be able to go outside my house and go shopping. I had to go buy something today, and it was literally straight into the store with carpeting, which helps me. Doesn't mute the sound. Grab what I needed, go to the checkout. Fortunately, it's not at the back of the store, like a couple other stores, which I might. Why must the thing one thing I need be at the very back of the store? So it happens though, and you have to deal with it. Do your best. But bless you. And for the record, I don't care, if you're lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, uh, ace, aro, any of that stuff. Feel, bless you. God bless you. Because I don't think God cares that much. And I'm sure I'll get flack for that. But you ever notice how God in one version of Genesis, because there's two versions in the very first beginning of Genesis, where it says he made man and woman. He made them in his image, at least in my translation. Then there's another version that tells about Adam and Eve. But the first or second, whichever version, that says he made them in his image means all of us, gay, straight, whatever, are still made in his image. Because we're not necessarily, God's not a physical being. He's not likely running around on two arms and two legs. He's a spiritual being. We are spiritual beings. So God bless all of you.